Hi, everyone. I wanted to record a new version of my original video on reading fiction. I like to start with fiction in the introductory or introduction to literature course because it is probably the style of literature we're most familiar with, whether we read graphic novels, short stories, or novels. And it is often what movies that we might love are based on. So I wanted to share with you um, a bit on reading fiction, just so that we can all be on the same page and start to delve into our assigned readings this first couple of weeks on fiction. So, fiction is, like I said, something that we're probably more familiar with. It is unrhymed, it is in a style of writing that sounds the way that we communicate with each other. And obviously, if we're reading older works of fiction, the language might be different than the way we speak today. It might be more archaic, a little bit more flowery, a lot more use of literary devices such as similes and metaphors. We tend to strip things down a little bit more now. The characters are realistic, maybe even if we're reading fiction that is, let's say, sci-fi, there is our ability to picture how these creatures or people behave, look, sound, talk. And it's set in an actual physical environment. So that can mean things like the place, the town, the city, the state, the nation. It can also mean, the temperature of the weather. And there is enough detail to have some sort of action that needs to be resolved. So it tends to be a bit longer than, let's say, a poem. And it is the style of fiction that we have to use our own minds to create what's happening on the pages, which is one of the, I think, wonderful things about reading. How when you're just looking at words on a page and you start to conjure up these places in your mind and what these characters look like and sound like, it's all you are the director, the producer, the screenwriter in your brain. You are creating what this looks like for you. Most works of fiction are going to have some kind of tone that they create or some kind of mood that you feel as you're reading it. It's pretty evident right away what that will feel like, whether it is a kind of joyous and uplifting and more lighthearted tone, or whether it's a more serious, somber, teaching you a lesson type of tone. And often we will be able to glean these details from just how characters talk to each other, what the setting is, what the plot or the action might be. It can also reveal how the author feels about the piece. And it can also sometimes reveal how the author feels about the reader. Um, I want you to start thinking about how you want to separate the notions that you have about who the author is and what they want from the idea that sometimes they are not one and the same. Just because an author writes about a specific style of person doesn't mean that they're pro or against this person. They just might enjoy creating those types of characters or those types of plots. Obviously, what they write about gives us a glimpse into how their minds work, but don't assume that the author holds the same viewpoints as the characters that they're writing about, for instance. So, in any work of fiction, we are going to be seeing things that have to be overcome. This is called a plot. So it's not enough for us to just be introduced to characters who are intriguing. They have to do something. They have to have usually some kind of conflict, and that can be small or big, can be multi-layered, but there has to be something that they are overcoming. And we're not reading The History of Love. I have had students read that in the past. It's a novel, but given that we're in a 7-week format now, we're not reading a novel. But for instance, one of the pieces you're reading is Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates. And the major events in that piece deal with a young woman meeting a man, being kind of attracted and also slightly repulsed by this man, having some conflict with her mother and sister, feeling that age-old teenage desire to break free from her familial structure, have some independence, but also figuring out who she is, what she wants, what she enjoys, what she doesn't. And then ultimately, the action at the end of the novel or at the end of the short story is the decision that she has to make about protecting herself and or protecting her family. So again, in all of the fiction we read, there has to be something that has to be overcome. There are characters, as we mentioned at the beginning, they are oftentimes more realistic. They seem like people that we might know or recognize or would meet on the street. And characters can kind of fall into two different camps. You have characters who are fully developed, so you know more about them, you know kind of how their minds work, you know what they like and don't like, they have more dialogue, they have more action on a page. And usually there is one primary character that we're rooting for that is called the protagonist. And that person is the one that we want often the best things for. Then you might have an opposite character to that called the antagonist. So this is a person who might be causing the trouble or the conflict. And we might not be rooting for that person. Sometimes in really layered or intricate pieces, the antagonist and the protagonist are one and the same. I think of one of my favorite shows ever is HBO's Sopranos, and Tony Soprano is a horrible person. But when I was watching that, and I have rewatched it, I root for him anyway because the writing has been done so well that I can see the layers to his humanity. Then you're also going to have characters who are more flat. And those are characters who don't get as much space and time. They don't get as much dialogue. They don't get as much development. And those are kind of the characters on the periphery. If we refer back to the Joyce Carol Oates piece, we're talking probably more about her mother, her father. They don't get a lot of dialogue. They get mentioned. We only see them from Connie, the main character's point of view. And so they are flatter. And again, we get to learn more about characters as the stories unfold, how they talk, what happens to them, the decisions they make. I mentioned the setting, and this can be a place that we can pinpoint on a map. It also could be a place that's really briefly described, and we have to kind of fill in the gaps. When you read Margaret Atwood's Lucis Naturae, we don't really ever know where this is set. And when it's set, we have to take some cues from the writing as to when it might have been set, where it might have been set. The historical time can have a pretty big influence. In the Joyce Carol Oates piece, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? It's set in I think it's the 60s. And it references a Bob Dylan piece of music. Bob Dylan was a cultural icon of that time. And so the influence of the switch from styles of music and what that means to the place. And when we get into some other pieces, the historical setting might have more impact on what happens and how the characters interact. That will be especially true when you read Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. We're talking about the 1800s and different standards of marriage, just different standards of gender roles and different treatments for women with postpartum depression. And then the social situation is, what's happening at the time. Are we being dropped in the middle of a dinner party? Are we being dropped in the middle of a road trip that the people are taking? Do the characters know each other? Are they strangers? So all of these things lend to helping us understand what's going on. Another thing you want to take a look at is whose point of view the story is being told from. A first-person point of view story will be told from personal pronouns of I, me, my, our, we. And when you read a first-person point of view, you are placing yourself more in the shoes of the main character, and you might feel more drawn to it. A lot of stories, a lot of fiction are told in either first or third person. Third person is he, she, they, them. So when we read about Connie in Oates' piece, we are reading about a young girl. We are not using the I, me, my pronouns. So we have a little bit of distance. We're seeing it. Very few pieces of fiction or literature are going to be written in second person or you, your. You might have some omniscient characters. Those are characters who know everything that's happening in a story. You might see some of this when we are watching drama. There might be a narrator who comes on stage and kind of tells us things about characters that the characters themselves don't know. And omniscient narrators know about everyone. Whereas you might have a limited omniscient narrator who knows everything about only one character. And so you're getting that one specific perspective from that limited omniscient character. I talked a little bit about how you don't want to confuse the author with the narrator. The author is the person who wrote the book or the story, and the characters in it are created by the author, but that does not mean that the characters equal the author, if that makes sense. Sometimes some of the best pieces of writing write about really horrific things, the human experience, if you will. And it does not necessarily mean that the author has been through those things or intimately understands them, but they're trying to write to express and to understand those situations. Unless something states this work is absolutely autobiographical, it's about me and my life, assume that it's a work of fiction. And of course, we take things from our own lives and our own lived experiences when we write, but we also create, we embellish, we change the way things have happened. So don't conflate those two. We are going to find that some pieces have more literary devices, more figurative language, the similes, the metaphors, the understatement, the overstatement, this sarcasm, if you will. And you have a notion called dramatic irony when we know things about the characters that they don't know. So because we've been able to read from other perspectives or see things coming or get these cues, we have this foreshadowing. We might know, oh, that person shouldn't go into that room because somebody's there and they're going to get attacked, but the characters don't know that. So there's that kind of dramatic irony that we know things that the characters themselves don't. And a good story will kind of plunk some of those through the story so that you feel as though you're on top of it, that you know what's coming, and it kind of hooks you into it. Themes are something that we will come back to again and again, whether we're reading fiction, poetry, or drama. And a theme is this idea about what can we take away from this piece when we read it and we analyze it and we talk about it, that helps us understand what it means to be human. And to be human is to feel. To be human is to feel everything from joy to pain. And one of the functions of literature is to help us process, to bring us together as people, to share our common traits and our common senses of right and wrong. And think about all the media that you might consume, whether that's a podcast, whether you do a lot of streaming services, watch YouTube shows or videos. You're probably drawn to some specific thing that helps you understand what it means to be a person in the world, whether that's learning a new skill or just watching people on Love is Blind, matchmaking, like what to do and what not to do. We are all taking in all of this information to learn what it is to be human and hopefully to better ourselves in that process. And sometimes it's just about being entertained, but oftentimes it's also about, reinforcing or disregarding the norms that we are seeing in front of us. So as you begin to explore fiction, some things to start looking for, and you can, I know all of our reading is online, and you might or might not be a person who prefers to take notes or highlight or have a separate document. I still like a good old-fashioned book, but I tend to, if I'm trying to analyze and read literature, have a pen and paper in front of me so that I can write down things, or at least have a Word document in front of me so I can take notes, so that when I do have to come back and analyze or write about that piece of literature, that I have some of those things to refresh my memory. So the tone, again, is just the mood of the piece. How does it make you feel? What are some of the things that happen that contribute? It was a dark and stormy night, gives you a sense of anxiety, a sense of foreboding. Pay attention to those things, especially up front. What's the plot? What's happening? What's the conflict? Who are the main characters who are having to overcome something? Where is it set? And again, that can be in time, in place, in a social situation. Is it a first or third person point of view? What is the theme, or are the themes? Oftentimes there's more than one. Are there any ambiguities? Are there pieces that you don't trust? I believe I've taken out the Poe piece that I have traditionally assigned for this term, but there's such a thing as an unreliable narrator. We can't necessarily believe or trust everything they're telling us, but theirs is the only point of view that we're given. So asking, like, whose voice is being left out of this, and can we trust what's in front of us? Does the story support or conflict with anything that you already feel politically, morally, socially? Is it something that butts up against your sense of morality, your sense of right and wrong, good and bad? And is it doing it to provoke you? Is it doing it to make you question? Is it doing it to make you see things from another side? When was the story written? Obviously, that has a big impact on the details that are included, and it can be representative of what's happening in culture at the time. We do get into in this class really pivotal moments between World War I and World War II. Lots of things were changing in the world because of those two wars. We had the uprise of the Industrial Revolution. We had the big world wars where multiple countries are involved, many casualties coming out of those wars. We had warfare that was advanced, chemical warfare. We could kill people in mass rather than fighting them face to face. So we started dropping bombs, and that had obviously a big impact on how we communicate and how we interact with our governments. Music change, culture change. We have the invention of the radio, the television, the internet. All of these things influence how we interact and how our stories are told. And then, can you connect the story to anything else that you've read or seen? What I've liked to start doing, and I'm toying with this idea for you for one of your projects for this class, is when you hear a piece of music, and music is essentially poetry set to music, can you relate it to a piece that you've read, whether that's a short story or novel? And can you start to hear themes that overlap and characters that seem familiar? And make those connections. And I think it's really fun to start piecing all those things together and trying to make sense of them. So that is reading fiction for this first week. We will be reading fiction for weeks 1 and 2. And you'll have your first literary analysis essay due, I believe week 3 is when I have it assigned. And if you're not in the habit of reading a lot, take a timer, start setting, 20, 30 minutes per day, maybe once or twice a day, and just get in the habit of sitting down with it. I started doing Duolingo about 2 years now, and so I forced myself to do about 15 minutes of it a day. Sometimes I end up doing it for an hour, but it's become a habit now because I made myself do it. So think about setting those boundaries for yourself. Start taking some notes about what you're reading so that you can respond to it in discussion boards and eventually write about it in your projects. I hope that helps. I hope you're having a great first week. And if you have any questions or concerns, please do reach out to me. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thanks.